Hey everybody, and welcome to Week 6, Collection Organization. This week's lecture considers how the physical layout of a library's collections contributes to collection quality. Some of the implications in this area are physical space, such as building layout, floor plan, shelving, as well as classification systems, ergonomics, and even signage. We will also discuss how physical layout of staff work areas contributes to that collection quality, and the idea of planning library spaces for patron use of materials rather than as storage spaces for library collections will also be explored. Let's get started. Building layout is the first consideration in a discussion of a library's physical space. When deciding where to house a particular collection, it's important to consider how the building is organized and how the building is laid out. A space plan can help to figure out the best course of action. A new library laying out an opening day collection has different considerations, of course, than reorganizing existing collections in current spaces. An article we linked to in the module by Stephanie Campbell cites some figures for configuring brand new spaces. They recommend specific allocations to different categories for different audiences. For example, they say that 23% of the total collection should be adult nonfiction, 21% adult fiction, 15% juvenile picture books, etc. This is really helpful if you know how many materials you have in each collection, how many shelves or how many stacks per row you have in any particular area of the library building. While every community's needs are different, this is a nice starting point for allocating space. Library spaces are about much more than where to stick a bookshelf. Like a collection, library design needs to be flexible to meet the changing needs of the community. 30 years ago, libraries were starting to include computers and other technology. Library buildings needed to accommodate computer stations. This also included more power drops, maybe a computer lab for training. Audiobooks about 20 years ago were exploding with our patrons. We had a lot of commuters in our community, and they were pretty heavy users of our audiobook collection. Initially, they were on tape and then CD, and again, libraries needed to adjust shelving to allow for more of this very popular format. Conversely, at the same time, the need for large reference sets decreased almost to the point of non-existence, and that freed up areas that previously held that kind of material. It might not be logical to simply stick the audiobooks in the reference space if it doesn't make sense. Space reorganization can be a real challenge, and rethinking your library's inside spaces and floor plans should be an ongoing concern for library boards and directors. The Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, MBLC, and a design firm named Sasaki created a guide called Library Space, a planning resource for librarians that has a lot of great advice on library space planning. It's linked in the module as well. They cover everything from technology and furnishings to spaces for physical materials to study rooms, service points. They discuss sustainability and resiliency of spaces, open spaces, patron navigation, and safety. So an interesting trend to note when discussing library space planning is the idea that spaces should be planned for people, not collections. Patrons use collections in different ways: reading, watching, listening, for research, for pleasure, for teaching and learning, for collaboration. This idea is that spaces should be centered on people and community, partnership and collaboration. Spaces for idea sharing may include library collections, but they are about the people and how they use the collections, not about the collections themselves. For example, if a public library holds a book discussion group in its meeting or event space, that space should be inclusive and accessible with comfortable seating, a good flow of people in and out and around the space. These are the types of things the library should be concerned with, rather than where the book club copies the group uses are shelved. This is a holistic approach to space planning, and spaces that are modular or flexible to different purposes should be given consideration. Libraries are not meant to be warehouses of books, but they do need reasonable layouts for the collections that enhance and make the use of the materials the most important consideration. We have an entire week devoted to libraries of things, so we'll just talk about physical considerations here. Items that make up libraries of things come in any number of shapes and sizes, different levels of fragility, and may even include parts or accessories that need to be connected physically so that users check out all the related pieces. Shelving for these materials could range from bins to open shelves to drawers to hanging systems. But libraries need to display the items or images of the items to let patrons know they exist, but they need to be kept safe and secure too. They can also take up quite a bit of space depending on how large the items are. There is a trend in public libraries of using a bookstore arrangement to shelve materials instead of a traditional Dewey Decimal classification system. Some say that a Dewey arrangement doesn't encourage browsing of related subjects that would fall into different Dewey categories. For example, the Dewey number for gardening is 635, while the Dewey number for landscaping is 712. In my library, that would be about 3 rows away. A bookstore model would put those subjects together. Opponents of the Dewey Decimal System often advocate for the book industry's BISAC system. Taking this one step further, the Dewey Decimal System is often criticized for being white and Western-centric, and many professional catalogers want better ways to describe increasingly diverse collections. For example, books about the biblical creation story are in the religion section, while indigenous creation stories are under folklore. Also, everything indigenous goes into the history section of the Dewey 900s, while indigenous culture is not strictly historical. It is thriving and current and relevant today. The other side of this argument is that libraries are better than bookstores because they have a system, and that system is universal between libraries. You may have to figure out a particular bookstore's arrangement, but in every library that uses the Dewey Decimal classification, the subjects are under the same number. However you arrange the collection, having a system of some sort helps patrons find what they want. Ergonomics has to do with how workers interact with their work environment. Here we're concerned with how library users and staff interact with library collections. Movement impacts collections in terms of wear and tear and shelving accuracy, and impacts staff in terms of bodily stress. So first, let's consider formats. There are a variety of cases and wrappings and other storage options for library materials. For example, many libraries choose to keep their AV collections in locking cases. These cases must be unlocked before they can be used and locked before they are reshelved. Depending on the type of case, staff must engage and disengage some sort of locking mechanism. The more times the case is locked and unlocked, the more wear and tear on the case, the lock, and even the library worker. In another example, audiobooks with a large number of discs may be placed in very large cases that can accommodate more discs. These large cases may be heavier, bulkier, and more awkward for staff to work with. Every time the audiobook is checked out, staff members will want to count the discs to make sure they're all there. Every time the audiobook is returned, they will count the parts again. In fact, every time a patron switches to the next disc, the case will have to be opened. 20 discs equals 20 openings and closings of the case. Again, depending on the case, all of these openings and closings may cause the case to break down, not to mention the user's hands. Libraries should consider all the possible options when choosing cases for processing their materials. Perhaps there's a format that requires fewer openings and closings, or maybe there's machinery that can do it for staff automatically. With RFID, there are automatic lockers and unlockers that cases can be slipped into pretty easily. Shelving and circulation both have a lot of implications for ergonomics. The more complicated a workflow, the less ergonomic it may be. Any staff who handles carts and materials should look carefully at their workflows for ergonomic efficiency. When materials are easier to handle and more efficiently move from place to place, the quality of the collection improves. So let's take this example a little further. Let's talk about the layout of staff workspace. In a technical services area where books are received, processed, cataloged, linked, and then taken out for shelving, the best staff setup would follow that life cycle chronologically. The materials would be passed from one area to the next as each step is completed. This would cut down on how often and how far the materials are transferred from one area to the next. Imagine if some of those processes took place on a different floor of a building or even on different ends of the room. Items would have to be carted up more times, and it would take longer to complete the full circuit to make the materials available for library users. Another example of this could be in circulation processes. Book return bins have to be emptied and the items transferred to the place where discharging or checking in happens, which is removing items from user accounts. Various processes happen at the check-in phase, such as counting parts, checking for damages, filling new holds on returned items. Anything that happens as part of the check-in workflow should be able to be taken care of in that same physical space. It doesn't make sense to cart items up from a book return bin, transfer them to another area of the library, unload the cart, handle them in various ways during discharge, cart them up again for either shelving or moving them to the patron holds areas. Physical spaces in staff areas are as important to collection quality as the spaces for the materials themselves. The more ergonomically materials can be handled by the staff, the more available and usable they are for library patrons. Signage is a catch-22 for libraries. Not enough signs and your patrons don't have enough information to find what they're looking for, whether that's a restroom or a library collection. Too many signs and they are overwhelmed by information overload. Signage has an important effect on collection quality. It affects access and use, which are crucial to the success of most libraries. So consider a library that serves speakers of different languages. If a patron's first language is not that of the library community, those patrons may feel isolated and frustrated when they come to the library. Imagine not being able to read the sign that designates the English as a second language collection. Libraries that serve a high population of patrons that speak certain languages should consider posting their signs in those languages. Even visual clues on signage will help these patrons. What if a library had a collection of books in Spanish, but the Spanish speakers didn't understand the English sign that reads books in Spanish? In these examples, the collections intended for non-native speakers might not be used because the intended audience can't find them. So the images on this slide go from worst to best. The first one just says music in English with no visual cues. The second one says music in English, but has a visual cue. The third one includes other languages and a visual cue. Children are another group of library users that need special signage. Small children who can't read yet or who are just learning to read should be given picture clues to help them find items in the library. Sure, their parents probably help them find specific titles, but children will be more comfortable in the library and learn about its services and how to use it at a younger age and more easily with signage they can recognize. Youth signage needs to be lower, bigger, and brighter. Signage they can understand will also help children put these items back in the right place when they're finished. Signs that announce collections and collection rules, such as reference materials do not circulate, also need to be big enough for library users to read. Can low vision patrons read the sign for a large print collection? Can they see it from far enough away to be useful? Low vision patrons may need signage that is not only bigger, but in different colors. Some people see light font on dark background better than the reverse. Some see yellow easier than white. Some see signs that are directly lit better than those in shadow. Some see slightly dull signs easier than the glare of direct light. Adding Braille to signage is a step toward inclusiveness and accessibility. There are visual literacy standards spelled out by the Association of College and Research Libraries, ACRL, but for special collections specifically for low vision users, care should be taken in signage so that access is improved. Signage that uses library words, like jargon, are among the least effective. Do library users even know what words like reference and circulation and nonfiction, do they know what that means? In order to be truly useful, signs need to use words that the general public understands. Alternatives to these library words could be in library use only, checkout for circulation, and information instead of nonfiction. When the sign says reader's advisory and the patron wants advice on what book will help them fix their car, is it their fault that they didn't go to the reference desk instead? They wanted advice on what book to read to learn how to fix their car. That's reader advisory. Library lingo means nothing to the public, so it should not be used on signs meant for them. Asking questions of the wrong librarian at the wrong desk is frustrating and ultimately leads to a customer service debacle if not handled carefully by the staff person. It's not up to the patron to know what they can ask of whom. Even handled gracefully, it's a time waster for the patron to have to ask again, tell their whole story at a different desk, or to spend time figuring out what a sign means. There's an article by Lauren Mandel written in 2020 that discusses wayfinding in library facilities. Dr. Mandel explains that people navigate facilities by wayfinding, figuring out where they are and how to get what they need. That's a quote from her article. Researchers into wayfinding are interested in how patrons navigate library spaces and how they use the resources provided, including signage. Another quote, the library wayfinding system, for example, maps, signs, architectural cues, needs to facilitate an efficient wayfinding process for the user that returns a satisfactory result. That means finding the location the user seeks. End quote. That's from Mandel, article in 2020, which we have linked to that article in the module as well. Signage is only one piece of effective wayfinding. Building layout and the logical placement of library services and collections are also related to this idea. Displays are a great way to use physical space to help people use collections and to boost their popularity. Many visual merchandisers suggest that book displays of out-facing books or face-out books make the collection more exciting than just shelves of books where all you can see is the spine. Make miniature displays at the end of different shelves so that there are outward-facing titles here and there throughout the collection itself. This doesn't require any extra, display furniture, and it nicely reveals some of the gems within the collection. Displays that are separate from the collections from which they came could actually confuse library users. They might get excited about the topics and titles that are exhibited and want to browse what else the library has on those subjects. But if the display is nowhere near the actual shelving location, they may have trouble finding more. Displaying the books right on their shelves gives an appealing bookstore feel, but leaves the books near their correct shelving locations. Merchandising is also part of displaying library materials to their best advantage. We included an article by Erica Freudenberger in the module. She says, quote, to drive circ, how you showcase your materials can be as important as what you buy, end quote. Merchandising is a way to display materials to their best advantage. They entice people to want to interact with them. It's a way to anticipate what patrons will find useful or tempting when even they might not know what they wanted. Everything from where materials are displayed, in what direction or orientation, to the signage connected to the displays helps patrons find and use library materials. Patrons might be overwhelmed with choices and not know where to begin, where an attractive display might catch their attention and help them make easier decisions. As always, the module is filled with all kinds of links and articles for further reading. So here they are on this topic of collection organization. And as always, you can discuss whatever you like in your discussion post, but we always like to give sort of conversation starters or some ideas for discussion. This is a kind of a fun one. Have you been in libraries that use different organizational methods, like bookstore models, where they use a system like BISAC instead of the Dewey Decimal Classification, or Library of Congress system? What are your thoughts as a librarian and as a patron on ditching Dewey? Or what are some of the best and some of the worst signs you've seen in libraries, and how could the bad ones be improved? What did you like about the good ones? Have a great week, everybody.